Call the names. Wake the room. Wake the room. Lulu! Rex! Pomeray! Naomi! Aphasiana! Babbler! Monarch Soul! Jojo! Gray eyes! Fill my eyes! Poets assemble. No masks, no manners. Say it plain or say it broken. Monday night in the garden of enlightenment. Low light lit minds, every line got intent. Clock ticks crooked and the room turns vigilant. Quiet so loud you can hear what the tension meant. Then it slips after midnight, manners get murdered. Nice little masks get cracked by a word or a murmur. Twisted Tuesdays twist truth till it turns on its heel. Clean cut faces go strange when the dark gets real. You can feel that shift, that slick little slip when the grin stays sweet, but the eyes don't sit. Like the room grew ribs, like the walls grew ears, like the hush got hands and it's pulling you near. And the words don't rest, they press, put a heel on the chest, leave a dent in the breath. Every line like a knock from the back of the brain, like you came in one shape. You won't leave the same. Late night poets, where the room leans in, where the sharp gets shown in the soft door dim. Hear the whole thing shift from a whisper in the ribs to a line that lifts from the darkened edge of doubt to the pull you can't ignore. We don't just read the night, we make it something more. Say it plain, say it broken. Late night poets. Wednesday breaks parts and apart, sink down the spine, half halo, half hazard, both hands in the light. Then the art of seduction walks off through the smoke. Silk on the tongue with the blade in the joke books and bards, wakes dust in the depth of the shelves. Old ghosts lean out and start naming themselves in our coffins, selling art. The ache gets a voice, pain stands up straight and makes silence a choice. Then break on through when the dead boogies wave, when the masses sink but the pulses pray. Echoes in the dark go hunting the fear, that thing with no name starts ringing your ear. Say it. Tongue, water it down, let it bite, let it bloom, let it burn through the crowd. Back company grins like a bruise, dressed smart in rhythm and rhyme, puts a boot through the heart. Late night poets, where the room leans in, where the sharp gets shown in the soft door dim. Late night poets, hear the whole thing shift from a whisper in the ribs to a line that lifts from the darkened edge of doubt to the pull you can't ignore. We don't just read the night, we make it something more. Say it plain, say it broken. Late night poets, some come shattered, some come slick, some speak honey with a blade in it. Some sound velvet, some sound wire, some walk in low and take the room higher. Some come holy, some come liars. That's the thing, this ain't filler for the dead space, no. There's a pause for the pen, this is blood with the net go. This is breath with the backbone, ink with the crown, loud mics like nerves, truth laid bare in the round. This is the beautiful mess, the bruise and the bloom, the line that cuts clean and makes a little room. Late souls, wide eyes, all nerve in the dark, a room full of hearts beating hard through the dark. Wake the room, wake the room. Oh. something more. Late night poets. When the clock slips past polite, we tell the truth. L&P, we love you. Stay frosty.
All right. Good and evil are not black and white. We all have a little naughty and nice. Poetry allows us to explore our dark sides and shine paths to the light. We write with the demon and angel on your shoulders. And this is part sinner, part saint. We are on Late Night Poets, as you heard in the opening song. We're a group on allpoetry.com, and you don't have to be in the group to participate, but it's so much more fun if you are, because you can read the poems as we do, talk to us in the chat, and see what contests we have coming up so you can have your writing on the show. I'm Aphasiana, and with me I have Babbler. Hey, Babbler.
Hello. Happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday to you as well. Or
How are
Wednesday
you
to
doing?
some of our audience. I'm all right. I had like the most fun day at work because I got to have like a little booth in the front of the Performing Arts Center. And there was this kids show, the Merry Marching Band. And they were like clowns, but they didn't look like clowns, but they like were doing like jokes and like picture like the Three Stooges kind of thing, but they were also a marching band. So they were hilarious, and they made music, and then they like came out into the audience and did things. So I was technically working because I had like a little thing like being like promoting the library. Like, we have books about this and here are free events and stuff, which I made some good connections there. But also I get to watch the show for free. So I love when they ask me to come have a booth. I'm like, yes, I will go see your show, whatever it is.
Absolutely. That sounds like fun. Sounds like a good time.
How was your day?
It was good. I'm super busy gearing up to go out for the summer. So, I'll be gone next week, and then I'll be back for a flash in the pan, and then I'll be gone for the summer.
I know. I'm gonna miss you.
Yeah, out on the ocean. I still don't have an exact leave date. It keeps getting juggled around. So currently, my knowledge is somewhere between June 9th and June 18th.
So. I still don't have a confirmed replacement for you. I gotta get on that.
Yeah, because I will be gone through the second week of August. So
it snuck up so fast.
Yeah. So I'm busy.
I bet.
Yeah, I feel like I'm working like 3 jobs at once, to be honest. So I also got my CPAP, so that's great.
Good. Now we're in the CPAP family.
Yep, and I had a horrible mask that didn't do. It was terrible. I fought it like all night long, and then it would come off halfway through the night.
Did you get a new one?
I did. So I went and I bought one myself. My insurance didn't cover it, but I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I went and got one on Friday, and then I spent 14 hours sleeping. And then I woke up, and then I went back to sleep and spent another 12 hours sleeping. And then last night, I slept for 10 hours. So it's working.
That's good, I guess.
I feel a lot more awake than I have in a very long time these last 3 days. I feel a little bit more like myself, which has been really nice.
I know. It's amazing what a difference it makes.
But like, I'm so behind on everything because I've been a zombie since like Thanksgiving.
Right.
So I've got so much to do and like no time to do it. So that's my current existence.
What about on the boat? Because when you're gone, you're on a boat, right?
Yeah.
Are you able to have your machine?
Yep.
Okay, that's good.
Yep, I'll have it. It's funny, I don't have like a nightstand though, so it's literally like a chair from the galley. but whatever, it works.
It works. Well, I still got to get the battery for when I go camping, which is coming up in like 2 weeks. I hurry up and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a plug, so. Yep.
Like normally I plug into the wall, but it's just if I'm not home, then I need a power source.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. On the boat, I'll have a plug.
Oh, that's good.
So it just plugs into the wall. But yeah, it'll be fun. Yeah, so my life's a little bit chaotic at the moment. Woo!
Woo! You know, it's not as chaotic sometimes. Poetry. So, although that's not always true,
No.
poetry can be a little off the wall, especially on our show, I think. And I mean, like, our first poem tonight's by Peter Solway, so, you know,
Oh, nice.
it might be a little chaotic.
Well, we've been surprised a few times by him, though, especially recently. I mean, it's always good stuff, but it's usually a little, I'm trying to find the right word, like, it's really layered, like, there's a lot going on, and it takes more than one read, but there's been a couple times we've gotten some simpler writes.
Yeah, he's gone a little bit easier on us.
Yeah.
Last time we read one by him, we couldn't figure out the one name that was in there, what the reference was. He told me he spelt it wrong. It was the composer of Black Swan.
Oh, okay.
Not Black Swan, sorry. Swan Lake.
Ah, okay.
I'm thinking of the movie Black Swan. The music from Swan Lake. So he said it was just funky spelling. So I don't think he did it like as an accident. I think he was trying to make it go with what he was doing, but we didn't recognize it because we tried looking up the name the way he spelt it, and he was referencing the composer.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So the contest that we're doing tonight is inspired by the Japanese word mono no aware. So I can't say it in Japanese, unfortunately, but it means mono no aware, which is something that I looked up because of this quote by Sarah Rule. There's a word in Japanese for being sad in the springtime, a whole word just for being sad about how pretty flowers are and how soon they're going to die. So it was the quote that got me started, but then I liked the concept of mono no aware. So that is the contest. And our first poem is called Snow Melt. And like I said, it's by Peter Solway. Snow Melt. Hopeful spring again, cherry blossom season, best of Coca-Cola capitalism, Fuji imaginationum. No more illegal immigrants, flotillas of opportunists, end of woodblock prints. Modern realism, repeat performances, white mountains in the whispered distances, Aratat shipping, rainbow landing, dove welcoming, end poem.
Well, this is an interesting take on this prompt. You know, hopeful. I thought it was interesting that it didn't just use the word hopeful. He wrote hope and full and connected them by a hyphen. You know, like, you know, it's funny because it's like that is what the word means, is like full of hope. But to make it really dense, like hopeful, just makes it seem like it's like stuffed with hope. Spring again, cherry blossom season, best of Coca-Cola capitalism. Which I thought was interesting too, because like he's commercializing it, you know, this making it about money making. He also spelled coca like the more traditional way with the K instead of the C, so COKA, kind of getting at like the coca leaves that it comes from, it's like the cocaine. So to me, that's making this kind of about the commercialization of the holiday and how it feels kind of false because it's no longer just about enjoying spring. You know, it's about like how can people make money off you enjoying spring. Fuji imagination or imagination. I don't know if that's intentional or not. But you know, Fuji, obviously like Mount Fuji. You know, like placing it directly in Japan, which I think is, you know, a play on the cherry blossoms too. You know, no more illegal immigrants. So there, I think we're obviously talking probably about American politics. in the current like anti-immigration stuff that's going on. Flotillas of opportunists. So like just tons of people ready to like, prey on opportunities. The funny thing here is I don't know if that's pointed at the illegal immigrants, like if those are the opportunists, or if it's people like who are coming in behind them and like profiting off of that. End of woodblock prints. So again, kind of like looking at like Japan again. And to me, that's again reading as like commercialization. It's not like handcrafted, handmade, or anything like that. It's now, everything's industrialized. Modern realism, repeat performances, white mountains in the whispered distances, Aratat shipping, rainbow landing, dove welcoming, is like again this kind of mishmash of like the happiness of spring and the beauty of Japan in spring, and still like this commercialization of it, you know, um, and you can have free shipping, like, um, just kind of a little bit of a mocking. I do just with my experience with Japanese and kind of the kanji there, that it says mono no aware, which is how that would be pronounced, is mono no aware. So just so you know. So that's how I would say it, mono no aware.
Thank you, because I have no knowledge of Japanese except for like watching anime.
I'm not like any kind of expert or anything. I just grew up with an older brother who was super into it, so I watched a lot of anime as a kid, and then I had a teacher who was really into it for like my 8th grade core teacher. So learned a lot of Japanese. We spent like 2 months on learning like different letters, like hiragana and stuff like that. So that's how I know you can't say my name really in Japanese. So, I think he really kind of ran with this. Like it's not really. I don't know that it feels sad to me, like the springtime sadness. In a lot of cultures, especially ones that I'm familiar with in Asia, you know, the cherry blossoms and springtime is kind of like a time of renewal and reunion. That often follows like symbolism of like the winter being like separation and longing. There's this real sense of yearning, you know, and like it's like a yearning sadness, like an empty sadness. So the idea of kind of like being sad in spring is like a quiet kind of wistful depression. It's hard to make a comparison in English. I don't know that there's necessarily like the direct translation that works really well, but whereas this almost feels like an embitterment of like commercialization. It still kind of captures that emptiness to me because it's like, oh, it's all been like monocultured. Um, and so it doesn't have like the same feeling. But this almost feels like it teeters on anger in a way, like a bitterness. Rather than like the wistful kind of sadness that I'm more familiar with. But I enjoyed the piece. It was an interesting layering of the concepts.
Layering, and that's what you said you're going to expect from Peter, some layers.
It's true.
Delivered. I found the separation of hope and full instead of hopeful made me think of, because of the next word is spring, it was like full spring ahead, but instead it was hope, full spring again. So I don't know, something about the full spring just felt like that was supposed to be together, and it worked more together separate from hope. But I couldn't quite complete my thought on that. I'm like, that's something. But what it is, I'm not quite getting there. It's just kind of like triggering something in my brain where it's like full spring again, and then it kind of like backtracks, because after again there's it's an end bracket, but the square kind. What do you call that, Babbler?
I'm drawing an awkward blank.
That's okay. I was too. I put you on the spot. But there's something there, and I think Peter is diligent enough that that's not an accident. Like, that is him trying to create some kind of break. So I'm just noting that there is punctuation there that is unusual, and I feel like it's trying to tell us something. Interesting that cherry blossom is capitalized. Like, cherry makes sense because it's the beginning, but blossom being capitalized is interesting because it, like you said, it's about commercialism, and it's like, instead of it being cherry blossom season, it's cherry blossom season, like as if it's like a company. And then when it talks about Coca-Cola, that's not capitalized, which normally it is because it's a company. But then it's pointing out capitalism. And it's funny because capitalism has capital in it, and I know it's a different kind of capital, but the fact that there's interchanging capital letters just feels like somehow that's related. Like he's doing something there with that. And then Fuji, while yes, it's a place in Japan, I also think he might be playing on Fujifilm, like it's a camera brand. And so I think he's misspelling imagination on purpose, because again, he is meticulous in his writing, and it's always like purposeful when there's something that seems not quite right to me, because he will send me a correction and be like, actually, I meant this. So I'm curious. Peter, send me your, well, actually, imagination means something else. And then the woodblock prints, like you pointed out, is kind of like the handmade version of doing things. We've done that at work. My community has a lot of like kind of hippie do-it-yourself kind of people, which I love. Woodblocking is becoming like a thing again here, because everyone's trying to be less commercialist. And I could definitely see him commenting that there's not that original stuff anymore, because in a lot of places it's becoming more and more rare. And I mean, I'm guilty. I've bought things from Temu. There's we give in to the buying things of cheap things from far away. But it's I like that he's mentioning the block prints here. And while I don't know what Airtat is, it's talking about the shipping, so that's like the ordering things online. But it's in whispered distances, meaning like you're not acknowledging how far away things are. This is just not really a take that I was expecting on the prompt, but it made me think. So thank you, Peter, for sharing. Our next one is by Hammer 8. And would you like to read that one, Babbler?
Absolutely. This is Nothing But Splinters by Hammer 8. She ruffles the cover, plays with loose cotton, picked from the blanket. I sit by the bedside, holding her hand full of bruises as time limps past, and the ghost of a life hangs by a thread. There is space in the dark afternoon, where the mind spreads wings and remembers. Ice cream and holidays, end-of-year fantasies, cold flannels, hot temperatures, hugs when I fell, and always the guidance of parents, links in the chain of love. The remarkable warmth of mother's hand, holding mine, reassuring. First day at school, on a bus journey back to visit grandparents or to spend the day at friends. Now I sit by the bedside, holding this cold hand, with nothing left but splinters of beautiful dreams, and a life full of wonder, reduced to cruel remains. End poem.
Oh, this is very sad. It does a really great job of conveying emotion and making us feel it. So it also, in the AN, gave a definition of the thing that I still can't say, the mono nowhere. And in this version of the definition, an empathetic, gentle awareness of the transience of all things. And so the transience of life as seen by an aging and ill parent. That last line is very pessimistic, reduced to cruel remains. And unfortunately, when someone is dying, there is that we have to have that bitterness, because even if we're focusing on the wonderful things about their life, there is that loss at the end. I like the details that it begins with, ruffling the cover, having that little piece of loose cotton that you play with, and then the fragility of the person being described, like the handful of bruises, and that time is limping past, also makes me think about how the person would probably limp. And things are going too fast in that they're fading away, but it's also going slow because you're sitting there watching things slowly get worse. You can't do very much just sitting there. So it feels slow as much as it feels fast. And there's that kind of contradiction going on. I liked where the mind spread wings. And then the way that it kind of goes over a variety of memories. I mean, within the same line, there's cold flannels, hot temperatures, which kind of, spans all seasons. And it goes back and forth between how old the narrator is in these memories. Splinters of beautiful dreams. I like that line, and I like that the splinters are in the title, because there are these little bits of the great times, and that's what's left. And what can you build out of them in making these memories more solid? It was beautiful.
Yeah, I liked this piece. It's obviously a sad piece. It starts out feeling sad. Even just the idea of ruffling the cover and playing with loose cotton, picturing the blanket. Someone who's doing that is usually, it's like you don't quite know because it's the opening of the piece, right? But it's someone who's ill, or they're in bed, or they're nervous, or someone who's just picking at things, especially a cover. It's usually like a bit of restlessness or feeling trapped or something along that side. And then sitting next to the bedside, holding her handful of bruises. Which, it's interesting because it's written as handful, like something you can hold in your hand, like there's bruises held in a hand, like they're objects. And yet it definitely reads as like her hand full of bruises, like, maybe a lot of misplaced IVs is kind of what comes to mind. The bruises that you get in the back of the hand, especially with older people whose flesh is a little more gentle. It's more delicate. It bruises more easily. As time limps past and the ghost of a life hangs by a thread. This being like the ending of something. And it's true, like people can die at any time. A lot of people think of it as winter, but really it's, all year round. There's no like, there's some seasonality to death, but that's not a rule. People can die anytime. And so this kind of contemplation of that, this looking back at the seasons of life, the different eras of life, ice cream holidays and the cold flannels and you know, mom holding your hand as you go to school, you know, all these things that you've done with your parents and the way that they nurtured you as a child. And now you're kind of at your end of the journey with them. You know, now sitting by the bedside holding a cold hand, um, and knowing that there's not a lot more of those memories to come. They're they're pretty much just all behind you at this point, you know. Um, and the kind of bitterness of that, the sadness of that. There's joy, you know, in the memories, and joy even in the time that you're spending together at the end. But there's also like a deep sorrow that follows that, you know, knowing that um, the time together is really starting to close up. So, you know, the end of a chapter. So, and to experience something like that in spring, you know, to see that like transience. I find that cherry blossoms in particular kind of stick with me with this idea of the mono no aware, because they're so short lived, right? They come so early in the spring. They come like in March, and they're like a week, maybe two, and then they're gone. You know, on the plus side, they're pretty quickly followed by plums, but like they're such a brief season. It's short and it's beautiful and it's glorious, and then it's over. And I think that's why spring kind of lends itself to this concept of transience. So, uh, I thought this was a lovely piece. There's an ache to it that is quite nice.
Well said. Our next poem is La Fuite du Temps by Gypsy Joe. She wakes. An eloquent eyelash sparkles as candlelight fire tips quiver and tempt. Hums of bumblebees murmur through the passage of hearts. A single violin string is plucked. A major engages open air, frittering the unseen causeways of emotional rhapsody. Petunia petal perfumes strikes the senses, all a race of our defenses. Grief shadows the aura as rolling clouds of thunder blunders blue skies. Cries call out to smiles like an aftermath, for time laughs, its roaring echo, chambers at joyfulness, knowing soon, soon it shall steal this moment. Lament comes too soon. None had been immune. Lament of death's cocoon. End poem.
Lovely read. I don't know French, so I'm not sure what La Fuite du Temps means. So that will remain a mystery for me for a moment until I can look it up. But it's pretty sounding. You know, this idea of someone waking up and an eloquent eyelash sparkles. It makes me think. I don't think of like glitter on an eyelash. I actually think of like just the lifting of an eyelash. That sense of waking. It adds a little moments of beauty to it, like a small detail of waking. You know, candlelight fire tips quiver and tempt. You know, I literally picture like a small flame. You know, these little things. I think these are just like these little moments of joy, just little iotas of it. You know, the little bumblebees, a single violin string, and then a major engages open air. Like I think that's A major, you know, so I think that's like the string that was, you know, plucked on the violin. Frittering the unseen causeways of emotional rhapsody. So like to feel emotion just from like one violin string being plucked. It's not even being played, right? Because you don't really pluck a violin string if you're playing it. You know, you use a bow, and you kind of rub it really with the horsehair. So to pluck it is to just kind of test it, like it's almost like you're tuning it. Petunia, I mean, there are some times you will pluck a violin string in like more modern violin playing that's kind of altered for like pop or something, but classically, no. Petunia petal perfume, lovely alliteration there, strikes the senses, all erase of our defenses. This smell. So now we're into like a different sense. We've forgotten sound. We've seen things. We've heard things. Like we're really exploring all of the senses here. And now we've got like a fragrance. Grief shadows the aura as rolling clouds of thunder blundering blue skies. Cries to call out smiles like an aftermath. There's a lot of spring is beautiful. Spring is like a rebirth of things, right? It's all of the plants coming up and the world kind of waking up to say hello, as mentioned in the beginning. But it's still stormy. There's a lot of rain in spring. It's really kind of a wet season overall. So the idea of it being like grief being the rain, rolling with these rolling clouds of thunder that kind of get rolled out, that are kind of co-occurring with the joy of spring. Like you've got the laughter and the grief and the crying all kind of put together, lament comes too soon, none had be immune. Laments of death's cocoon. This kind of for me that seems like this sad, like the loss of rest, like this kind of missing of the quiet moments, the coziness of winter being put away, and the kind of observation of change, and there's loss in that, right? They say like every death is a birth, and every birth is a death of something else. And I think this kind of leans into that a bit. So I thought it was really prettily done, and it was nice to see all of the senses, all of the senses explored in this piece. So lovely, right, Gypsy Joe?
Excellent comment. As far as I know, the title means the leak of time. Ta is definitely time. La is the, and do is like kind of. Preet, I just looked up because I didn't know that one, and it means leak. So the leak of time would be appropriate for this. It's time escapes us. This made me think of like it seemed very intimate. They're waking, so they're probably in bed. There's candlelight. There's the buzz of their hearts. I liked that the hums of bumblebees murmur through the passage of hearts. I really like that line. And you're right, violin strings are not generally plucked. But if there's that single violin string, it's like you're making music with your touch. It's like you only have to do one little thing, and it's like the music has begun. So that seemed like a sensual thing to me. The frittering and unseen causeways of emotional rhapsody was a pretty intense line. I like the alliteration of the petunia petal perfume. And the lament that it's going to be over, but that it says lament comes too soon means not only is it over too soon, it's like while you're still in the good moment, you're already sad that it's going to be over. And I think that's really like the key of this prompt, is that even as it's beautiful, you're thinking, but it's temporary. So the lament coming too soon, it's like you're with someone and it's awesome, and you're like, well, they're going to leave. And even if it's not like leave forever, it's like this moment cannot last. This really awesome time is not going to be continuous. And there's a sadness in that. And so it takes away your enjoyment of that moment, knowing that the moment will end. So I really liked that in terms of this contest. I think it worked very well with the prompt. I see that you found the next poem, so you can go ahead with that, Babbler.
I did. This is Robin by Hickory, and it goes like this. Along the wooded path, a fragment of shell, like the spring sky on a robin's egg. The hatchling, now a glutton, transforms from repugnant into splendor. Finally a fledgling, to forsake his home and pull spring into summer.
I like this acknowledges that baby birds are ugly. Most baby animals are so cute, but honestly, when birds first hatch, they're disgusting. So transforms from repugnant into splendor is so true, because when they're like still almost a baby, but they have their feathers, they are adorable. But before they get those feathers, repugnant is actually a good word for it.
Chickens get a pass. Chickens get a pass.
Yeah, they get fluffy pretty quick.
They're so cute.
They do. They are. I know. I've hatched chicken eggs, and they are cute, like pretty much right away. Some birds don't get their feathers till later.
They don't.
I like that the shell and the sky are kind of compared here, because the robin's eggs are such a beautiful blue. And the fragment of the shell there just reminds you that like the eggs have already hatched. We're at that stage where they're we're not anticipating babies. We have the babies. And it's not only that they're in the nest, the fledgling has like kicked away those shells and now is ready to move on. And I like the way that it's an action, pull spring into summer. It's not like summer happens. They pull spring into summer. It's an active thing for the bird. So the only thing about this one is that it seems like it's pretty much all hopeful to me. I don't see the sadness. And only I lament the lack of sadness in a poem. But I feel like in terms of the prompt, this is missing the sad part. What did you think?
Yeah, for me, it felt like maybe the aspect on sadness isn't really that much about sadness as much as it is on how spring isn't that pretty and they'd rather it were summer. There's a fragment of a shell, sitting there, and it's like, oh, so there was a bird hatched, like there was a baby bird, and then they picture this baby bird. And they're not flattering this baby bird in any way. A hatchling, now a glutton. Because they're pretty much just a giant mouth that is hogging up a nest that waits essentially for its mother to come vomit food into it and clean up its droppings. And it's not cute. To transform into something pretty. To transform into a robin or a bluebird or something more conventionally visually appealing. Finally a fledgling, to forsake his home and pull spring into summer. This it's spring is a time of growth, and growth isn't always pretty. Growth is hungry and dependent and a little bit ugly. Before you turn into yourself, right? I think kind of like a toddler that really only thinks about themselves. It's not because the toddler is cruel, right? That they punch someone and demand things and throw tantrums. It's because that's like where they are in their development of becoming a human being. And to me, it kind of feels like that. Like that spring is like a kind of ugly season. That will eventually turn into summer. Like, it's okay that spring is ugly because it will become summer. And so I think this does lean more into like that transient aspect of the theme, and not so much as sadness. There's not like that wistful sense of sadness or loss to it that I think we see in some of these other pieces. I do think this is a beautiful piece. It's a really nice like slice of life moment that kind of looks at something in a way that's not particularly cliche. It's kind of a little more revealing, a little more raw look at spring. So as a piece, I really enjoyed it. I do think it is definitely a slant on the theme, though.
Slants are good. Yeah.
I don't mind them. I was that kid in school. Whenever I got assigned an assignment, I always took like the contrarian aspects of it.
I mean, I'd like it to be like connected to the prompt,
Yes.
which it still is. Last week was kind of a lot of not at all on topic.
Oh yeah.
Like some of it was related to the name of the show. There were a lot of sinner saint things, which happens, but it was like the majority of them were either that or completely off topic. Like nobody actually wrote to there were like, I think there were 3 out of 20 that actually were about the prompt. But that was the one where temporarily the picture was gone though, and the picture was the prompt. So to be fair, they might not have seen the picture. But I'm happy that today it seems like people read the prompt. So that brings me joy. I'm good with being like an unusual take on the prompt, but I do like my prompt to be acknowledged. So this one is Silent Truth by Ed Hunter. Her flowers bloom in a silent world, touched by loneliness. They live in the mountainous range we cannot explain. Each morning, brilliant petals garner an effervescent glow. Early sunset, voices speak through a silent breath. In the twilight, nature's essence touches the moon. Life's quest is to understand our final truth. End poem.
Well, this brevity is interesting because it has a softness to it, but it also has a real directness to it. Her flowers bloom in a silent world, touched by loneliness. Like that's very direct. Like it tells you exactly what he means. That there's this quietness to the blooming, that they're really kind of alone. They live in the mountain range we cannot explain. They're isolated. There's kind of a lack of, they're not around other things. It's not like the cherry blossom that's right next to you that you can touch in the tree when you walk in the park. It's something that's a bit harder to reach than that. And yet they're beautiful. Effervescent glow. This really kind of beautiful light. Effervescent being like bubbly. It's interesting because in my mind I picture like fizzing magnolias. like I don't know, it's very interesting. It almost sounds in my head, because the way I'm just such a visual person in my head, I could almost like hear, like it's almost like someone dropped Alka-Seltzer into like magnolia trees. That's how when I read that's what I hear. I see like bubbles of light like lifting up, and then like I hear like Alka-Seltzer.
That should be the title of a book. Fizzing Magnolias, and then the cover looks like that. All right. That is your assignment, Babbler. Write me a book.
Just write you a book just based on this, on fizzing magnolias. I don't even know what it would be about. This early sunset, voices speak through a silent breath. So voices speaking through silence, almost picture whispering or like an exhale. And then you've got now the evening. We've gone through like the day, essentially, like dawn and morning and sunset, and now we're in twilight. And it's still spring, and yet we've gone through a cycle, like a cycle within a cycle. Life's quest is to understand our final truth. And so like we've got this one moment that has like a full life within it. And I think it's kind of saying like examine these things, the little lives within lives. I do find it, interesting that it's like this sad, distant thing. It almost feels like worshipful, or like, being put on like a pedestal in a way. because why? I think it's just like about like the first flowers of spring, right? The silent world touched by loneliness. But why are they in a mountainous range? We cannot explain. Like, what makes these so like unreachable, like untouchable, like almost to an extent of like exotic? In some ways, it feels like the manic pixie dream girl of flowers. um,
I love that.
Fizzing magnolias, the manic pixie dream girl of flowers. But just this idea that there's something really so unreachable about these things. In some ways, I think of this as like the this is gonna sound so harsh, and I don't mean it this way, but these are the words that come to mind. Is like the weird, like worshipfulness of like feminine beauty that is like at its heart kind of misogynistic, because it's being treated in a way that is like untouchable and unknowable and almost goddess like, but then that's also like double edged because it's like I don't understand women. I don't know. And that's probably like an overreach for this poem, because I do think it's really more about like the cyclical nature of things and like the lives within lives, and the cycles that happen even on these small scales. But there's also like this untouchableness of this piece that is like reverent, but it's reverent in a way that just irks me personally, that probably doesn't for anyone else. Overall, I think this is a lovely piece. That it is reverent. It is a reverent piece, and asking people to look at kind of like the micro cycles of not just flowers, but your own life, as tied in by the last stanza, I think is rather pretty. My mind just goes other places. I tend to take things and just run. So, thank you, Ed Hunter.
When I thought about the effervescent glow, I was kind of thinking about how every time I've seen cherry blossoms, it's always been like a scene where they're kind of falling off and blowing in the wind. So maybe them kind of floating away looks like bubbles to people. So that effervescent glow is like the sunlight bouncing off of them as they kind of blow away in the wind. I'm doing hand motions right now. You can't see it, but I'm
sure they're great. They're just as excellent as me trying to explain the fizzing flowers.
Right?
I can hear it. You can't, but I can.
When it says we cannot explain, I think part of it is like the wondering of like, why do these bloom at different times than everything else? And it's like they're lonely because, yeah, it's early spring. Nothing else has come out yet. They're there like, so I guess it's just me. And then they leave. And then everyone shows up to the party. It's like they feel like they've been stood up, but they're just early. And then the speaking through silent breath is just there's this connection sometimes where it's like you don't even have to say anything, and there's this kind of synergy between people, and maybe the sunset kind of speaks to the plants in a like they have this connection. They're both like beautiful and colorful and very brief. The sunset is like one of the shortest times of in terms of like, there's morning and night, and there's like this little bit in between where we have a beautiful sunset. Well, there's winter and there's summer, and there's this little bit of in between where we have spring and everything is blooming. So I like that connection with the sunset. Thank you, Ed.
All right, so the next poem is When by Beer. I don't know why I said beer. Bear Den 7. Um, so this is when. When the sky paints, the forests watch the sun, holding our firstborn, 60 years full, a single dawn of eternity lingers. Winter so cold, snow so deep, while May whispers green promises, those little spaces among spaces transit become silences, motion, and death, happening equal to birth season cycles. Truest call, like dreams, vibrate eternity, like life, like Degas, memory ballets spun wind touching, embracing pastels melt into kitchen floor passion, entwined images of beauty's soft sunset soul flight, imprints our human journey vision, a cherishing mystery, simplicity's joy. And we spun with them all in so many places you wanted to see, walking, watching, laughing, while opening our divine way. Oh, yes, I live there now, full time mirrors, without you asking a thing. Oh, yes, to elusive echoes, mirages, shadow glancing frozen clouds, a one sided togetherness slipping in gently, slipping in like a sledgehammer. Sighs, my mono no aware heart, an ammonia burn stings, tears returning home into my fallen eyes, smiling in a space, the same, yet in Neverland, where you plus I dance. A list of songs drift, become our own chances for infinity taking us on. The kiss, the hand, the care, pain if I turn, the brushing moment, love, lessons, separation tied to cut kindling for tonight's fire match. There, you are in the dafts, the crocus, dandelion flower tea plus root coffee, sipping Chardonnay, laughing discoveries, our little pauses with forever, the familiar exhale, never looking away, just outside, another twilight, breathing in another night's temporal shadow, spreading through the trees. H. End poem.
Excellent read, Babbler. So, for those of you who aren't looking at it, you're just listening to it. This had some very unusual spacing. It wasn't line breaks so much as it was like spaces in the middle of lines for things. So, for example, when it says, winter's so cold, snow so deep, and then there's like 5 spaces, while May, 3 spaces, whispers green promises. There's a whole bunch of lines that have very unusual spacing where I don't know how I would have read it out loud, but I think Babbler did a fantastic job because I would find this very challenging to read out loud without practicing this specific thing because there's so many unusual choices here. And I'm sure that they are intentional and that the different spacing means something. But I can't say that I fully grasp all of them and the significance of the spacing. Like sometimes it's like clearly like to make you think. But it puts emphasis on some things and not other things. And there's capitalization that kind of happens in places that I would not expect. So, for example, in the line, like dreams, space, 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 vibrate eternity, space, 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 like life, space, 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 like Degas, space, memory, space, space, space. And in that one, anything with an L was capitalized. Like, life, likes again. Like is repeated multiple times, and it's always capitalized. So there's an emphasis on things being alike. I'm trying not to say like similar to other things, that there's connections there, and it's emphasizing the fact that there are connections. With life capitalized, it's how those things become life. Dreams and eternity and memory are all linked to life here. And words like mystery and simplicities are capitalized in the middle of sentences. Shadow and elusive. So I think key vocabulary, like it kind of reminds me of like when you're teaching someone how to read, and you like, or new words that are important are capitalized. This is like calling to the reader, like, hey, pay attention to these words because they are important to us in this situation. An ammonia burn stings, tears returning home. That is an interesting choice there. That ammonia kind of smell that you can get, that not normally I would connect with tears. There have been times when I was really sick that my sweats kind of smelled like ammonia. I don't know if it's because I was sick or because of my meds, but I've never heard of anyone having tears that were like ammonia, unless ammonia is what's making you have tears because it is so strong smelling. But I'm curious where that part came from, because it's a very distinct smell, and it would definitely stand out. Dandelions are mentioned here, and I think they're a fantastic thing for when we're talking about the fleetingness of the beauty and of life, because dandelions so quickly turn from the yellow to that kind of poofy white, which I think was in his last poem that we read on the show. Ben Hart described them as bones. It was like the skeleton of the flower, and I really liked that. The dandelion kind of skeleton version. Yeah.
I remember that. I loved that line, the dandelion bones. Yeah.
Dandelion bones, yeah. So it switches from the yellow to the bones to something that is like pretty much gone, flown away. So there's a fleetingness to dandelions, and to have that turned into the tea, and it's kind of like you're sipping the temporariness of life. There's something kind of special about that, so I liked that was included. What were your thoughts, Babbler?
Yeah, I agree with what you say about the spacing in this. It's very intentional. I feel like the capitalization as well. It's not standard capitalization. There's a lot of words and phrases, word pairings that are capitalized that are not standard. As well. So in addition to all of the breaks, there's also like an emphasis on certain words based on capitalization. For example, in the very beginning, the first couple lines are, when the sky paints, the forests watch the sun, holding our firstborn. 60 years full, a single dawn of eternity lingers. So, not only is there large gaps between paints and the forests and firstborn and 60 full and a single and eternity lingers, we also have capitalization on sun, holding, firstborn, 60. There's this kind of additional punch to certain words. So there's a lot really kind of going on in this piece. And there is on top of that additionally punctuation. We have these really long ellipses, like after death. There's quite a few periods there to make up that ellipses to really give it a pause. And those ellipses appear in a few other places as well. And there's question marks and exclamation marks. Like there's a lot of interesting use of I don't know what the word is, punctuation and spacing and things like that. and this, to me, what they're kind of getting at is just like how fleeting life is, and how um how these moments kind of cling to your memory, and how a lot of the memories that do cling are um the strong memories, which is really kind of what I got from ammonia. This remembering holding your child. But it's not just that moment, it's 60 years of memories and moments that are going to happen with this child, ideally, at least. This single dawn of holding your baby for the first time, then goes on into other firsts and other springs and other moments that are, these kind of markers for a life, and death is happening as well. This is the next stanza, and death happening equal to birth, season cycle. So like while things are born and while things grow and bloom, and you have May with its green promises, you also have people dying. You also have people at the end of their life. um, I think it's interesting to take the death stanza and bring in Degas, because he does paint a lot of ballerinas, but yes, he does work with like these pastels and these really romanticized images, and yet there is kind of an interesting wistfulness to his art. Like, it's not that bright, it is kind of dark. He has a lot of really dark backgrounds, and you do feel really distanced. You almost feel like an observer watching other people live lives in Degas' art pieces. So these memories of ballet, not the act of dancing ballet, but the remembering these moments of watching them. And how that is kind of like imprinted on us. We're like basically books of memories and photographs. This, as life goes by, you experience more things, and not all of them are good. Remembering these good times, then you hit these midpoints where it says, oh yes, I live there now. Full-time mirrors without you asking a thing. Oh yes, to elusive echoes, mirages, shadow-glancing frozen clouds, a one-sided togetherness, slipping in gently, slipping in like a sledgehammer. This slow loss of a relationship, this slow falling apart, um, that happens so gradually and then all of a sudden. And whether that's a death because they've died, or just because a relationship didn't work out, um, but it's over. And these things just, they happen so sudden, and yet at the same time, if you look back, you can see it happening gradually. This um these strong like moments, these snapshots. So an ammonia burn stings, tears returning home into my fallen eyes. So ammonia, it's a very strong, as you were saying, chemical, and it will make your eyes absolutely water, and it burns and it hurts and it's painful. um and it also, depending on how you work with ammonia. If it's different if you work with it like as a cleaning agent or as like cat pee. But for me, who works a lot with like freezers, like in freeze drying or freezing fish and things like that, it's liquid ammonia, which freezes your skin, which can kill you rather suddenly. But the thing that will kill you before anything else really is the freezing. So there's this kind of ice that goes with it. Um, smiling in a space the same, yet in Neverland, where you and I dance, which to me calls back to that Degas, like the memories of better times. So to sit in a spring and realize that you used to be happier, to sit watching things kind of bloom around you, and just remember like the times that things were blooming for you while you're in a bad space now. you know and trying to reconcile all of that. Love, lessons, separation tied to cut kindling for tonight's fire match. There you are in the daffs, and I think daffs is short for daffodil, the crocus, dandelion flower tea, and root coffee, sipping Chardonnay. So we're slipping into memories now. I say she, but the narrator is looking around and thinking of all the better times that they had with somebody that they loved and cared about that isn't around anymore. And so while everyone else is like enjoying the spring, they're having another twilight. They're remembering all the times that life was better than it is now. So it's this kind of grieving. I thought this was a really beautiful piece. The spacing and the stylization is really unique. I can't say I've seen one exactly like this. And yet it really kind of works for me in highlighting the messages. And it's almost like crying in spaces on a page. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really beautiful piece.
Crying in spaces on a page is a really cool way of saying that. All right. Our next poem is by Ben Hart, who I just mentioned earlier in a comment. And I saw him in the YouTube comments as well. Hey, Ben. Okay, so let's get started on his poem. What a Cup of Apple Tea Now Sings to Me at Midnight by Ben Hart. From steam, unfold onto this rain-soaked void, elegies of spring, of blossom, the dusk-infused shrapnel perfuming the dew, and every permission of skin. Of your favorite mile to the sea, where the mayflies now waltz over roiling leagues of nettle and jewelweed. Of the forests, at last, shedding amber at the final toll of a snowdrop, where winds give chase to themselves, and the spent light recounts to you its origins in constellations of anemones. And for a moment, we were driftwood, linen-wrapped and heaving, a wilderness making a last stand against its corporeal frame, against returning to the dream. And there I went, down the rivers of time, cut across the palms of the hands of the children of man, home to an ocean of touch. End poem. Oh, I also want to say that this was dedicated to Jojo and Shamala. Shamala is a poet from our group who passed away last week.
Oh, I'm sad to hear that. I enjoyed the title of this piece, this What a Cup of Apple Tea Now Sings to Me at Midnight. This idea, I picture smell more than anything. Teas tend to be really fragrant. And it is a sense that brings up a lot of memory. It's tied very close to memories. So the steam unfold into this rain-soaked void, elegies of spring. And I think that works really well too, because tea's been preserved, right? Like you've got fruit and flowers and leaves and things from a different season, maybe even a different year, depending on how long you've been hanging on to the tea, right? And so in some ways it is an elegy. You're smelling blossoms of a spring that's past. The dusk-infused shrapnel perfuming the dew and giving every permission of skin. This kind of being pulled into other sensations based on this smell. Your favorite mile into the sea, these different images that are kind of pulled. Mayflies, and I'm not sure what jewelweed is. I love the idea of jewelweed. I don't know what it is. I picture something really colorful. And I also I love nettles. I know I'm strange. I grew up in the woods, and we had quite a few patches of stinging nettles, which don't sting you if you touch them from the top. And I used to pick them all the time and make soup. And they're delicious, and I love them. And they're kind of fuzzy on the top too. I always thought the leaves were just a really pretty shape, but yeah, they don't feel good if you let the spines stick you from the underside. And it's possible too that where he is, the nettle isn't stinging, but here it stings. Here you get you get acid jabbed into. At last shedding amber at the final toll of a snowdrop. So it's kind of like this, the way that's phrased with shedding and snowdrop, like evokes the image of tears to me without actually ever saying tears. And amber, amber is like petrified, right? Like it's really old, but sap isn't. So like the tear itself is like a wound in a tree that happened like a very long time ago. And I think that pulls back from like the tea being, from seasons past, and amber is like a tear, like a mourning of an injury in a tree that happened millions of years ago, or at very least thousands. I don't exactly know how long it takes amber to form. And so to like look at amber as kind of like to hold that grief. To kind of go back in time like that. And then there's this, and for a moment we were driftwood, linen wrapped and heaving. For some reason, when I picture driftwood wrapped in something, I think of like the talking sticks that we had in elementary school. So, like my teachers had us all take driftwood, pieces of driftwood and sticks, and like dip yarn into glue and wrap them around sticks. And then she would grab a random one out of a bin, and only the person with the stick was allowed to talk. Mostly just to control conversation so it didn't go off the rails. But that's what I picture when it's like driftwood wrapped in something. I go back to imagining those talking sticks. She'll just put like beads and feathers and all kinds of things on them. This kind of transient thing, right? So again, driftwood is a death that happened some time ago. A tree that's, we don't even really know how or why it felt, but somehow it ended up in the ocean long enough to be like smoothed by it. And then to linen wrap it is like kind of like delicate. It almost feels like a funeral, like to entomb it, to do some kind of funerary rite to it. A wilderness making a last stand against its corporeal frame. This, it makes me think of, and I think this is kind of riffing on what you were saying, like the driftwood kind of being like the bones of a forest. Kind of what you don't even really know where it came from. It's very disembodied. And there I went down rivers of time, cut across the palms of hands of the children of man. This kind of, and then this tea was plucked, from half a world away, probably, or many worlds, depending on where things came from. If you really understand like the logistics of manufacturing, if you have like a fruit tea with all kinds of different ingredients, it could be a global participation in putting that tea together. So in that way, it's like a time capsule of a few different years in all around the world, kind of put together. To end up in your teacup at the end of a night. So I thought this was a really beautiful rite, kind of about this memories of the past and seasons of the past, and the way different things are kind of captured and held, and grief can kind of be frozen. And now I guess I will sometimes probably think of a cup of tea as like a funeral for spring that passed some time ago. So lovely, right?
Yeah, that is so beautiful to think of it as a funeral of spring. I never would have thought about that before this poem, but that's a great way of summing it up. Ben commented, oh no, those bastards sting. which I'm
I don't know. I'm only familiar with the woods around me. I don't go around eating out of Pacific Northwest woods.
Well, one of my partners is like obsessed with nettle. It's like her special interest. She's autistic and like, has like focused on this. So she's really into nettle and how it was used in the past. So like she turns it into fibers that she weaves and like makes things out of. Like it's like she's going to be making clothes out of the nettle that grew in the woods near her. Like it's like from the very first stages, all of the different things of dealing with the nettle, but she also makes nettle tea. So it's like depending on what time of year you pick it, it does a different thing for you. So she's like writing a thesis on how nettle provides in all different seasons. So she would love this so much.
I mostly just liked eating them in the spring. I always thought too they were just kind of a natural fence.
Right? That actually works. Yeah. Which reminds me, I was at this farm this weekend because we were just picking up wood. What do you call it? It's like a circle of wood. Rounds, I guess, to use as throwing weapon targets. And we went to this woman's farm and she had all these little pigs who were like super fuzzy. And I never realized that pigs were fuzzy. So we're there like playing with the piglets who were crazy fuzzy. And one of them was new. She had just purchased him. He wasn't part of the family that always lives there. So he didn't understand that the fences were electric. So, I mean, it's not enough to like seriously hurt or kill them, but and I was like jumping over them afraid of getting hit by the fence, but all of the other pigs are like completely just staying away and they're like all walking along all happily like with a safe distance, and that little guy kept like going up to the fence and like zap and like what, and then tries it again, zap. I don't know, sorry, I got lost on a thing, but I don't know how I got there. Anyway, something about this reminded me of that. And the spacing in this is also important. So we had talked about in another poem where there was some interesting spacing. This also has some really cool spacing in terms of the alignment of the I need to work on like my vocabulary of spacing because it's so often a thing within a poem. But how far it's tabbed in varies depending on the line, and it's like it's not bullet points, but like within each section it kind of like is indented, and then you go back to a beginner line for an area. There's especially space around where it talks about the void, which makes perfect sense that would have extra spacing. The dusk infused shrapnel is fantastic, and I think that goes with the whole nettle, where it's like it's perfuming the dew. So there's this plant that will leave its a weaponized thing inside of you, and those blossoms can be both beautiful and dangerous. Perfuming the dew and every permission of skin. If you touch it, you're gonna be perfumed with shrapnel. The idea of the mayflies waltzing is nice, and then jewelweed, I had time to look up while you were talking. Like I just Google image search. I didn't like properly research, but it is gorgeous. That bright orange, and it almost looks like there's a little face. The way that the inside parts of the plant are. It reminds me of the Disney Alice in Wonderland, how the plants have faces within them. It kind of has that look. So cute. I want these plants now. They probably can't grow here, but beautiful. All right, jewelweed. I now have to investigate where I can find that. But if it's with the nettle, maybe it's dangerous too. That's okay. I'll get Angela to tend it because she loves her nettle. I'll be like, can you plant some jewelweed in with that? The shedding of amber, I love the way it's described as the tears. I thought you did a really great job at commenting on that part, Babbler. And the thing is, when it's talking about the last shedding amber of this one, their tears now. That's showing that they're going to be amber in the future. So yes, we have the amber, the tears of the past, but we're still having those trees cry in the spring, and they will hopefully that will last a really long time, and it'll be amber for like the next generation. Well, I mean, probably more than one generation. Long later, I don't know how long it takes to be amber either. Those tears will have become something amazing. And if it seems like the trees are doing their crying in the spring, it's interesting that wouldn't be in the fall, because they lose everything in the fall, and it's not that they're like, you know, if we're personifying them crying that their leaves are gone, they're crying in the spring. I find that interesting if we're going with that as a metaphor. And then a constellation of anemones is really cool. I confess, the only anemone I have any like thoughts about are Finding Nemo, when I know that clownfish live in anemones. So I probably don't have good context there. But I love the idea of constellations of anemones. I feel like that would be really pretty. And the driftwood linen wrapped, I like what you had to say, Babbler, about it being like kind of like a burial shroud. And heaving a wilderness, making a last stand against its corporeal frame. It's like it has gone through so many different stages of life, and now here it is as the driftwood that is, you know, its last form, and taking a stand against its corporeal frame. It's like it's ready to move on to being almost like just an idea. And then he talks about being in the dream, and in the AN it talks about agreeing to meet in a dream. We said the artwork is called Where We Said We'd Meet in Dreams, which is really nice. I also want to read the AN. Have you ever seen the way steam bridges a two-dimensional existence into a three-dimensional one? How it lays there upon the surface of the water, painting itself into shapes, almost as if from these shapes it untwists and blossoms into a third dimension, and then into none. Maybe that's what death will be. I mean, how fucking gorgeous is that, AN? That's a poem in itself. Jeez, Ben. Gotta knock it out of the park doubly. Okay. I think I have rambled enough. So thank you, Ben, very much. And we will move on to our next poem, which, Babbler, have you picked that one yet?
I have not. Sorry, I have been listening to you.
What? Me? You fool.
I'm sorry. It is Everything is Nothing, by Poetry and Percussion. I'll go ahead and give it a read. Serenity is a lioness, resting, observing, on the savannah with no contemplation, and I stare at my watch, mourning as the seconds die. As I walk, I fall towards steps ahead, but only see memories of footsteps washed away forever. If there is a difference in memories and obituaries, it only lies in my mind's tenacity to distort the truth. And of those memories, someday I will join them in the minds of those who have been witness to my presence. And the memories that I hold, of which I cry, will be silenced in mass extinction. If something is now, and the future is yet, and the past is gone, and what is now is just a delusion of perception of past and future, then everything is nothing. How can I not live in sadness when I miss everything and it is all for nothing? The universe, the big crunch, fluctuating universe, the ultimate sadism of God, the creator of all except immortality. End poem.
Wow. This is really deep. I like it. The Serenity being a lioness is really interesting because I think of Serenity as like being a calm state, but a lioness observing in the savannah is a hunter about to pounce. And Serenity about to pounce is just a fascinating concept to me, because it's kind of the opposite of my initial thought of Serenity. But the fact that you're like waiting for it to become something is really interesting. And then when it's talking about the memories and the difference between memories and obituaries, it's like tends to be when we're talking about people in their obituaries, we're talking about their key moments, like their big things that happened, their weddings and children and like all those things. And then the memories we have of people are the little everyday things most of the time. It's the small details that matter to you, but that's not the things you put in obituaries. And obituaries tend to be very positive, where maybe your memories aren't all so positive. So it's kind of like that. I like that it says distortion of truth, because even within our minds, we sometimes do that. We tend to like glorify the dead, and gloss over things that we weren't so fond of when they were alive. One of my favorite parts in here is when it talks about how his memories, or like memories in general, will be silenced in mass extinction. That idea of when you die, it's not just like a little thing that dies within your consciousness. It's like all of those memories die together. That is a fascinating subject that I feel like could be its own prompt. Don't mind me as I want to branch off of like every poem. There's something to think about though. When you read poetry, be inspired.
Mhm.
Look at a line and go off on a tangent based on that in poem form, and then give the person who sparked it credit and maybe comment so they can see. Actually, a couple of my friends on All Poetry, that's kind of how we connected, because it's like I would read something in their poem that I really liked, and then I would write something based on it and I would put it in a comment, and then they would do the same for mine, and like went back and forth, and then that's how you make poetry friends. Or people are creeped out because I respond to their poems. We'll see. It depends on the context. So don't be freaked out if I comment on your poems, people, because I do it to a lot of people. I mean, not that doesn't make you special, because I only comment on the ones who I really love. Now, where's the other part? The idea that like the future is not really anything and the past is not anything, so that makes the now not anything, is kind of an overwhelming existentialist kind of moment. But then in his AN, he says, as this is such a sad poem, I want to clarify that I do believe there is some greater purpose to all, but we're just not even close to advanced enough to understand. Secondly, the future, the past are very sad, but just live in the present, in the moment. As a floating fluctuation, future and past, you can live in peace. So that was Dan's. And oh yeah, he said that I could tell his secret in quotation marks. Poetry and Percussion is the poet formerly known as Daniel DeShino, who was my co-host for Double Helix. Because he has a name thing, he's he's not putting things in his own name in writing because there's too many people with his name and it's going to be confusing with things. But he's still here. Just read his poems on poetry and percussion. Babbler, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first, hooray for having Dan back, but also, yeah, I thought this mirrors well for me, like the way my thoughts will spiral, kind of going into these different ideas and eventually ending at some weird, like, I don't want to say weird, like it's bad, but like philosophical contemplation, to just start with like serenity as a lioness, resting, observing on the savannah with no contemplation, which is fascinating to me because I have like made eye contact with it wasn't a lion, it was a tiger, and their gaze is like so intense, like it is wildly intimidating. Like you just know that like if there wasn't some kind of protective barrier between you and them, there's really good chance you'd be dead. So it's interesting for me to contemplate him as like this kind of lazy house cat. Although I will say it was a tiger, not a lion. But in general, like predatorial cats can be really, really intense. You know, but thinking about like that relaxedness, I think the point here is that like when you don't really have a predator and you can be relaxed, just kind of doing whatever you want to do and choosing to do nothing, is kind of like an apex predator thing. And I think it's a good metaphor of like thought. Here we are, we're humans, we've made it so that we're not in, for the most part, the situations of our ancestors where we like struggle for shelter and have to spend a ridiculous amount of time hunting for food. You can just go to a grocery store and get food that way, or even if you are poor, it's like going to like food banks and things like that. Like for the most of people, not all of people, but most of people, survival has become not what sits on your mind every day. And so your brain has time to wander and contemplate things, and I stare at my watch, mourning as the seconds die. You have time to mourn the passing of time because you're not busy fulfilling Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so as I walk, I fall towards steps ahead, but only see the memories of footsteps washed away forever, which is funny because that's where my mind went, is thinking about like the people of the past and how they didn't have the luxury of this kind of time. There's a difference in memories and obituaries. It only lies in my mind's tenacity to store the truth. I find obituaries a bit funny. I think recently there's been more of a push to make them a little bit more honest. But certainly there's times still, and it was popular, especially in the past, to really only say good things, right? Like, don't speak ill of the dead. Like, you really only write about the best qualities of people who pass away. Like, this is not your opportunity to, like, denigrate them or, like, besmirch their character. This person has passed away. Like, share the good things that you recall. But what about all the bad things, right? And that's where this, distortion of the truth kind of comes into play, this really only remembering the good things. And yet, then we get to this next stanza where it's like, well, what about all of the memories that I have that no one else is even privy to? Which I think is very true. I think nobody truly 100% knows anybody. Everybody has parts of themselves that they don't share with anyone else, that no one knows. All the hours spent alone, all the thoughts not shared and things unsaid, and experiences that no one was a part of. Those die when you die because nobody else has those memories. Like nobody else could possibly recall those things. Never mind the people who are so busy like praising you for all the wonderful things about you. and people kind of brushing aside the flaws that make you human. There's still all those sides of personas that people didn't even know. And never mind the fact that no two of these people knew the exact same version of you, not because of some kind of fakeness or fraudulence, but because personalities are like inherently reactive to like the environment and the people around you. Like how you interact and what you say and do is influenced, by norms of like who you're speaking with. I don't speak the same to my 5-year-old niece as that I do to the 65-year-old fisherman that I work with, and I certainly don't speak to them the same as I do my best friend. These are just, there are different versions of me people get based on who they are in my life. And same for them, by the way. I don't expect that those people talk to other people the same way that they speak to me. So this idea of these memories that aren't shared and versions of selves, being silenced in a mass extinction, I think is a really cool thought. And then to go here and say, like, if time is constantly transient, right? Like you can't go back and the future doesn't exist yet. And all you have is literally this moment that you're in. And yet this moment that you're in is completely infatuated and encompassed by the things that have already happened and the things that are going to happen. Like you're taking memories of the past to make decisions about the future, then like the now is just incredibly transient. Like it almost doesn't exist. So it's like here I am in this moment that doesn't really exist, and the past doesn't exist, and the future that doesn't exist. Then what is all of this? This everything being temporary and transient, not only our lives but the exact moment that we're in. Does anything really exist? And I think that's a really big piece of existentialist philosophy. That's a question that's been asked now for as long as people have had time to luxuriously think about the big old question, why? So I enjoyed this piece. I think it's inherently philosophical.
Excellent comment. Our next poem we have an audio for. So our lovely Pam, who's been lurking in the background, is, I hope, able to play us the audio that Weaver of Dreams sent in.
The dichotomy of burgeoning life and imminent death hangs over spring like a mist of regret. As sharp green shards pierce the soil, there lies a promise that is hidden within the darkest threat. Aware of a creeping miasma of decay, dampened only slightly by the smell of freshly cut grass, our joy in welcoming spring to warm the air, lighten our minds, and bring forth flowers, will pass.
Thank you, Weaver of Dreams, for making that audio for us. I love getting audios so we can hear the poem in the poet's voice. You can send us a SoundCloud or YouTube or an MP3, and we will happily put your audio on here. So Weaver's poem has the mix of the beauty and the death, which is very appropriate for this prompt. Burgeoning life and imminent death. I like it described as a mist of regret, because spring does tend to be pretty misty. Not so much where I am now, but I used to live in Salmon Arm, BC, and when you like see the mist rolling over the mountain in the morning, it is intense. Like you cannot see the town at all. I used to live on a little hill just above the town, and it's like gone in the mist. It's very eerie. As sharp as green shards pierce the soil. So this reminds me of Ben's poem, and when he calls it shrapnel, because here we are with grass growing, and it is generally a pretty gentle thing, but the sharp green shards pierce the soil. It's like spring is fighting its way out. It is done with winter and just gonna like poke through. And a promise a promise that is hidden within the darkest threat. That is interesting to call it the darkest threat. And then to have the smells kind of fighting it out. There's this decay of all the things that fell down in the fall were rotting under the snow all winter. And then here they are, and they're kind of stinky. But there's also the smell of the new plants. Now, mind you, I am a weirdo and I don't like the smell of freshly cut grass because I'm a little bit allergic to it. So I'm like, oh no, freshly cut grass, run away. But I understand that it's a good thing. And then there's this joy, but it will pass. So I think Weaver captured the prompt very nicely. Babbler?
Yeah, I agree that this is very nicely in line with your prompt. The marriage of life and death, right? This you can still smell like not still, but like you're beginning to smell like the decay of the soil because things are thawing out. All these leaves fell in the fall, and then we're more or less frozen in the winter. I mean, that kind of depends on where you are, but things don't break down as quickly in the winter. What largely breaks down leaves are things like worms and larvae and insects, and those really come out in spring. And so some of that spring smell is that soil smell that is actually decay. And that's what I think of by this aware of a creeping miasma of decay dampened only slightly by the smell of freshly cut grass, which is interestingly its own kind of murder, right? Like it's its own kind of death. You have this grass that's just starting to grow and you're like chopping it down with a blade. So I thought that was an interesting choice because freshly cut grass very much embodies the concept of birth and death at the same time. Something that just starts to grow and is like immediately hacked down. Like you're smelling what is essentially the equivalent of blood for grass. Our joy in welcoming spring to warm the air, lighten our minds, and bring forth flowers will pass. So even this joy is transient. Like you're happy it's spring, but it won't be spring for that long. This is a temporary moment. It's a season of change. Just as fall is also a season of change. So with spring, it's a reminder that seasons are turning. It is a very active moment of change. In some ways, it's almost like the real seasons are summer and winter, and spring and fall are just the seasons of becoming. So I enjoyed this piece.
Seasons of Becoming. That feels like it should be like a TV show name. Seasons of Becoming, which is going to be like childhood and middle age, because like being a teen or an elder is like the real thing. Seasons of Becoming. All right. I'm in my second stage of becoming.
I think I've only been unbecoming this whole time.
I mean, fall is my favorite season, so it's appropriate. Yeah.
Same.
Okay. Our next poem is by S.E. DeHaven, and it's called Sakura Syndrome, Mono No Aware. My liver erupts with annuals, purple pansies and black-eyed Susans, my blood a weak soil. Bowels full of carnation and camellia, bachelor's buttons and Queen Anne's lace left. Blooming in the cockles of my heart, my brain crawling with yellow jessamine sweet poison, honeysuckle trumpeting between the alveoli of my lungs, the daffodils bowing over my spleen. My body whispers it in cemetery roses, petals crepuscular as dried blood. The flowers hear the words and know death comes for flowers and flesh. Soon, too soon. End poem.
This is wonderfully dark. I love it when things are like slightly grotesque, when they really kind of, especially that like kind of biological like decay. I don't know why I've always kind of liked it. And is this mixture of it with the beauty at the same time, to talk about all of these very like almost autopsy like phrases, um I think is rather gorgeous. And to call it Sakura syndrome, I think works really well too. You know, my liver erupts with annuals, purple pansies and black-eyed Susans. My blood, a weak soil. you know, to um, I picture when you say like my liver erupts, right? I picture like bile or like cysts or things that aren't particularly beautiful, right? Like annuals aren't supposed to grow in your liver. Um, you know, I do think it's interesting too that it's an annual, so that means there was like a seed of it there. It's not a perennial. It's not something that's going to keep growing from like a rhizome or a tuber or anything like that. It's a new thing every year. Bowels full of carnation and camellia. So like your bowels, typically what is full of is poop, right? Like, so instead of fecal matter, it's florals. um and you've got like this beautiful imagery mixed with like this kind of grotesque biological process. Even the word cockles is such an interesting choice. The cockles of my heart. There's just something about that word that's like kind of antiquated and still kind of falls into like that gothic horror kind of scene. And maybe it's just like the era of the world. um Honeysuckle trumpeting between the alveoli of my lungs. um Fun fact, I'm like horrendously allergic to honeysuckle. I only know this because there was a huge lot of it that had been planted at a garden when I was a kid that went like over my tire swing, and I spent like all the entire time that thing was blooming. I had a horrible migraine that was like so bad I would vomit. And it took a couple years to figure out what was causing it, and then we realized, oh, it happens every time the honeysuckle blooms. I have a perpetual migraine. um, so I don't like honeysuckles very much. My body whispers it in cemetery roses. So now we've kind of like doubled up on this, because now not only do we have this kind of post-mortem body horror going on, we've also got brought the flowers to a place where flowers do naturally occur, which is in cemeteries. People plant flowers in cemeteries. They plant roses in cemeteries. They bring bouquets to cemeteries. Like, people bring flowers to a place of death all the time, very often in the spring, because many plants bloom in the spring. Um, petals corpuscular as dried blood. Their flowers hear the words and know death comes for flowers and flesh. Especially when you think of bouquets. Sometimes sometimes when I'm feeling a bit cheeky, and I will say to my friends things like, here's a gathering of um, dismembered plant genitalia. Enjoy watching it die on the counter this week. But that's just because I can be very dark. Like, and it reminds me of that a bit, when a bouquet really is like you've cut down flowers, a plant in their prime, like you've literally like hacked off their reproductive organs, and are offering them to the dead, which is really kind of dark to think about. I remember you, and so here's some like dying plants. soon, too soon. This really speaks about like how people and plants are both alive, and they're things that both die. They're bright seasons of life, and then there's also death. And it's interesting that we honor, memorialize death with flowers, which would obviously harken to spring. So I liked this piece. It was a bit grotesque, but I enjoyed it.
I think the grotesque is honestly an appeal of it. I have to agree with you. I like the darkness. Something about your comment reminded me of this scene on a TV show that I just watched, Cardinal, which is like a murder mystery thing. It's set in Canada, so I don't know if it's actually available where you are. But there's this scene where a guy goes into a greenhouse and he's like, I want a flower that I'm probably not going to murder. And the guy's like, well, have an orchid. And he's like, no, I have a history of killing orchids. And he's like, oh, you'll do better this time. And he's like, isn't it strange that we put different value on different kinds of life? Because if I told you I have a problem where I killed puppies, you would not have sold me a puppy. But here you are selling me a flower that I... It was just such a great scene because I'm like, true. So anyway, something about your comment reminded me of that scene. I like the choices of flowers here. That the liver erupts with annuals seems to me because it's like you tend to be hard on your liver, and you like put new problems into it every year. if you're like a drinker, like whatever. I don't know, that this made me think about like, not necessarily putting lasting health into your beverage and food choices. My blood, a weak soil. So again, it's sort of like recognizing your weaknesses. And then that carnations and bachelor's buttons and Queen Anne's lace are in the bowels. It's kind of like you're shitting out relationships, because like carnations are kind of like that, like beginning, give your crush a thing. And then bachelor's buttons, I mean, it's emphasizing like the bachelors. And then the Queen Anne's lace, for some reason, I associate with weddings. I actually don't know what it looks like, but something about calling it lace makes me think that it's like that. So it's like your bowels are full of bad relationships. And then your brain has I actually don't know what yellow jasmine is like. I should have looked that up while you're talking. But I was too busy listening to you talk. That it's crawling with it makes me think maybe it's something that like spreads really quickly, and so it's like you kind of spiral out, and thoughts grow kind of out of your control. This part reminds me that like there's often kind of sentences that continue on in the next stanza, which I find really hard. So like, for example, the final line of the third stanza is with yellow jasmine sweet. Then there's like a line break and a space, and then poison. And it's supposed to be sweet poison, but it's like it's broken down into the next line. And same with like the end of that stanza, the daffodils bowing. Then there's a line break, new stanza, over my spleen. So it kind of like forces you to very quickly get to the next stanza. But my broken brain is just like, wait, sentence not finished. Oh, there's the sentence. I don't know. Now, of course, poetry is not supposed to necessarily be in full sentences. So I'm not criticizing, because I think this is a legitimate way of doing things. It's just my mind sometimes like gets confused when there's a break. Where is it? The whispers and cemetery roses is a good choice, because it does tend to be roses that that I say I've never done it, give flowers to the dead. I'm very much a give people things when they're alive person. I'm not very good with death. And just thinking about bodies afterwards. But the continuation of flowers and flesh together, and recognizing that just like flowers, we are vulnerable, is a strong ending. I really liked this way that the flowers were incorporated into the different organs.
I can almost see it as a painting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That could be nice.
I think we're almost done for the night.
It's 11:30. You're right. You are correct. I lost track of time.
I'm like, it sounds like you're digging up the next piece, and you really shouldn't be.
I was, and then I saw your it popped up saying that you commented